This is the way that I usually make my 12 by 12s. This is my last 12 by 12. It's a finished product now called Balls and Stripes. I have another one in process, and I wanted to show you the process that I do. My design this time is, the theme is masks, and my design is comedy and tragedy. So I drew up comedy and tragedy masks and put them on fusible web and fused them to the back of this wonderful sparkly gold fabric. And then I fused them to the red background, and I also decided they needed a little gold rickrack. So I glued the rickrack down, and then I stitched the rickrack down with a quilting foot using free motion quilting. I stitched the mask down using the button or the blanket stitch. And in order to do that, I usually, if I'm going to be doing stitching, I put a piece of batting behind my background. That way I can do all the stitching that I need to do, and it won't pull up. So this is what I am for step 1. We're going to move on to step 2 in just a few minutes. Okay, step 2, sort of. After I finished getting the masks and the rickrack on top of my background, then I decided I needed a little bit of quilting, and so I used some red thread and just quilted in the background slightly. On this one, the quilting I didn't think was all that important. So then we're ready to now put on the rest of the parts. When I did the front, the background, I cut the background just a tad big. This square may have been 12.5 inches square rather than 12 inches. So I cut it a little bit big in case when I'm quilting it shrinks up. So the back of the piece will be, I just use a piece of muslin. I cut this one a little bit big too. It's just, I think 12.25, just muslin. I also use, I think it's Pellon 72F or something. It's double-sided fusible, but this will give the piece a little stiffness, which I like. So when we're going to put them together, I put the back down, and then I put the fusible Pellon on top. And one thing that I always try to remember to do is put my applique sheet on the ironing board. Okay, then I put the back down, put the Pellon on top, and you can follow the directions for putting Pellon to fuse it. It's on the paper that comes with it. Then I put the actual background, the completed piece on top. And if you remember from before, I don't want to put a hot iron on top of this. So if I could have my assistant hand me that paper there, the parchment paper, a couple of sheets would be great. Could I have another sheet over there, please? Just to make sure that I don't mess up. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna put this parchment paper down, and I'm using a very hot, and it also, for this, it calls for steam, so I'm gonna use some nice steam. And I'm going to press all 3 layers with the iron. I'm going to just kind of go over it a little bit, just to put them together, and then I'm going to flip it over and do the back. Now follow your directions for your product, because see, this didn't get through the Pellon to get this on. This, well, I'm gonna put this down because I see. Now this will require a little bit of pressing. It takes, I think, 10 seconds or so in one spot to make sure it gets pressed nicely. Okay, I'm going to press both sides and get it nice and pressed. I will keep pressing and come back in a minute. The next thing I have to do is trim this now. I want to trim off some of the extra on the outside edges to make it exactly 12 inches. So, and that's not a whole lot of trimming. I'm going to try to set this in the middle and luckily I had this nice big ruler. Well, you know what, I think I may have to trim this a couple of times. So you don't need to keep that on there. Okay, now I have this pretty much to a 12-inch square. May or may not be exact, but it's pretty close. My back or my binding fabric is this fabric right here. So usually when I make these 12 by 12s, I just fuse the binding on rather than sewing it. So I take a piece of fusible, paperback fusible web. I like Steam a Seam 2 Light. And I cut a piece that's roughly 4 or 5 inches wide and 12 inches long. And then I fuse it I don't really fuse it, but I just lightly fuse it to the back of my binding fabric. So this is my rectangle, and this will do all 4 of the edges. So I take my 4 by, I think this is actually 5 by 12. But I'm going to cut this in half. No, I think I'm going to cut it down to 4.5 so that we don't have much of a difference here. 4.5 inches. I don't need that. So now I'm going to cut this to 2 1/4. I'm going to cut this 2 1/4. Now I have 2 pieces that are 2 1/4 by 12. But I like to have that wavy edge on the inside. Okay, we have a piece 2 1/4 by 12. I'm using an old ruler of mine. I'm laying it at the about 1 1/8 mark. It's basically, I want to try to go a half. If I'm not quite at the 8, that's okay. Because my wavy cutter that I'm going to use, I don't want it to actually touch the ruler. It can tear up rulers, but I'm going to do right next to it, and I'm going to press pretty hard because this may not be a brand new blade. There, I cut it nicely in half. And now I'm going to take and fold with my fingers, pressing the back. I press it to about the bottom of the wave. There. Then I'm going to take that to the ironing board and give it a little press there also. And then once I've pressed them on the ironing board, it's going to be time to put them actually onto my finished mask project. ready to move on. Now the tricky part. The tricky part is we want to take one of these and we peel the paper off of the binding and we center it, and that fold line should be at the edge of the, right at the edge. You can turn it over and see in the back. I'm pretty close along the edge there. So then I'm going to just pull this over and I press it down with my fingers. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom. And I'm going to basically do the same thing on all four sides and then press with an iron. Now I'm pressing this fused binding with this nice hot steam iron because I won't sew on top of it. It's all just fused. But now this kind of a binding I would only use if I'm using it on wall quilts, because I'm pretty sure if you tried washing this, it may not live up to it. It may come off. I don't know. These are wall quilts. These are not bed quilts. And were it not for the fact that I have this gold fabric under here, I probably would just put my iron right on the top of this. And when I'm done fusing this down, then I'm going to put the name on the back and sign my name on the back and the date. And I'll be totally finished. Well, I usually put I guess I'll put it at the year. There you go. All done with comedy and tragedy.